Tree Commission meeting of February 7th, 2008 will come to order. And we have a full agenda. It kept expanding, in fact, as the week went on. And we also have a new City Council representative, Ilahu Ghazni. Thank you very much for joining us. The first order of business is tree permits and right-of-way issues. And we have a tree permit application for a site at 95 Central Avenue on the corner of 2nd Street. It was a request by the property owner there to have, let's see, an assessment of a silver maple, or is that a sugar maple, large maple tree on the corner there. And let's see.
Oh, sugar maple.
Sugar maple.
Yeah.
So Ann Bonner, our urban forester. And Ann, yes, indeed, sugar maple at 95 Central and 2nd Street. Ann noted in her assessment that this is a mature tree that we've been monitoring. It exhibits some decline, includes 2 hollows, some lower branch dieback, some depressed bark on the trunk, and that the dieback coincides with the branches that were pruned by the property owner last time the Commission granted a permit. And at that time the branches that were overhanging the house were pruned, but long stubs were left, and the stubs have now died. The branches that have not been pruned look healthy. So the tree is, Ann, would you want to say anything else?
I did not feel it was a structural hazard to the public right-of-way or to the house. It is, you know, those dead branches that are actually quite, you know, they're not that big. They should be removed. I mean, they should be pruned back properly.
Okay.
Because they'll shed over time.
Yes.
But the branches that weren't cut, you know, there's lots of good stem elongation. It's otherwise, you know, the tree's hanging on.
No. And David, you looked at it, did you?
I did not look at this
I'm
one.
sorry.
No.
Okay. Did anybody else get a chance to do that? I looked at it, and it did look healthy. But I understand that there had been a limb that had fallen into the street at one point and was removed by the city. There don't seem to be any more limbs out over the street.
Yeah, but I'd say that we can predict more branches dropping, you know,
Yeah.
as those dead ones kind of just senesce. So,
Yeah.
so that,
You recommend a deadwood pruning?
yeah, I think that would be, you know, and whether that falls under the purview of the property owners, you know, I forget what they wanted to do. Did they want to prune?
They wanted, well, they wanted an assessment.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah, I mean, deadwood pruning would extend the service life of the tree.
Okay. Is there any other opinion?
Was that, are the stubs all dead? So would that include the stubs then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, the stubs are pretty long. You know, they kind of just cut off things that were offending the structure instead of taking them all the way back, you know, to good branches.
This is, do you think that this is something that needs to be done in the very near future?
I don't think it's an emergency.
Okay.
Not any big widow makers up there or anything.
Yeah. Okay, we have a priority ranking for tree prunings or removals, and there is an emergency status, which usually doesn't even come to us. The city just does it.
I'd say put it on the list.
Okay, this will probably take a while. I would imagine we will accumulate about half a dozen or so jobs, and that way we get a better deal from a tree service. This is not something that the city can address itself. We don't have the equipment. So this will be a job that will wait until we have enough jobs to make it worthwhile to do. Okay, that's one. And at the South Side Park, Ron Lucas, the city's arborist, noted that sent an email to the Tree Commission that the city recreation department has some concerns about 3 trees that are on the miniature golf course at that park. This is not something, Steve, you don't know whether this is happening in the near future, changes to the park. I think not. They're still putting the project together to improve the park. And Ron Lucas said he was approached by Rich Campitelli and Chris Smith about removing 3 trees that are on the miniature golf course at the Southside Park. Attached is a drawing that shows the trees in relation to the park, 2 maples, a white pine. Their concern is the white pine tends to drop a lot of needles and sap that damages the course, while the maples drop leaves and seed pods. Ron has looked at the trees and deems them to be healthy. It is understood by Arts, Parks, and Recreation that trees must be replaced at other planting sites in the park. So Ann's not had a chance to look at these trees.
No, I did.
Oh, you
I
did? You're
and
fast.
And I wrote an email on it too. It was
Dang.
my
I
best
saw it.
email.
I saw
Oh, wait a minute.
I figured
Okay.
that's not the one that you guys have
All
in front
right.
of you.
I
No,
apologize.
they are structurally sound. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about these.
Go for it.
They're structurally sound. I think it's reasonable to maybe speculate that the trees were probably planted as part of the structure there, the recreation area. You know, I just felt, I think it sets a bad precedent to remove healthy trees. In my email, I wrote, you know, that Alvy and I spend half our daylight hours communicating with property owners who understand the value of community forestry, but really are sick of cleaning up the leaves and the pods from the tree in their front yard. And I thought, boy, if the city can justify cutting down those healthy trees just because of the leaves dropping, boy, it's going to be hard for us to make our argument. So I felt like those were nice trees, could be worked around. And but, I don't know, what'd you think, Lee?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, trees have a lot of benefits to them, but if they're deciduous, they lose leaves, and if they're not deciduous, they lose leaves. So
It is a lesson.
it's part of the tree's way of life. So
And that whole area sits in a bowl. For those of you on the, you know, it's the Southside Park area. It sits in a flat area surrounded by woods. So it's going to be collecting, you know, the debris from every tree in the neighborhood. So you know, I'm not sure that they'd get the, you know, the results that they wanted anyway. So.
Yeah, yeah.
The white pine in particular was really healthy, and I didn't see a lot of dead needles on it, nor a lot of accumulation in the park. I mean, there was a significant accumulation of the red maple leaves, but the white pine in particular was very, very nice, healthy
Yeah,
tree.
handsome thing had been limbed up some for
Yeah, the red maples weren't going to win a beauty contest or anything, but they were all right.
true.
But
They were- they were very
who of
healthy.
us would? I mean,
right.
Especially red maple.
We don't want to go there.
Well, there is a dying maple nearby that one tree commissioner who's not here tonight spotted, and that probably needs some assessment. At the moment, it sounds like the commissioners are not particularly impressed by a need to remove healthy trees at this site. So I will communicate that to you folks in Parks and Rec. There may be some more information that we do not have that may have some impact on this, but for the moment.
Just for the record, too, you know, if there's one thing we've learned in urban forestry, that a tree that you've got growing and surviving and thriving is way more valuable than any stick that you can plant in the ground and nurse and love and water. And, you know, there's such high mortality of those new young trees.
Yeah.
But what did you say? It takes about 15 years before a tree is really generating that oxygen and using up that carbon dioxide that we're all...
Yeah, they really kind of kick up their environmental benefits when they get to about the size of those trees. You know, that's when they really start to give back. You know, so that's just something else I think to think about. We got to protect the ones that are growing, even though they're never in the right place. But
Yeah.
you know, that's just part of the game. So.
Yeah, these things are actually working for us. Okay, well, I will communicate. We may hear more about that, but for the moment, now, that would be a very bad precedent.
I'll have no friends.
Are there any other tree permit or right-of-way issues at this point? We have one that's a tree permit and a landscape issue coming up. But yes,
I'd just like to add,
yes. Go to the podium, please, and let's see. We have to timing.
Greg Broadhurst, 14 Granville Avenue. Just like to offer a perspective on Second Street, just because I was at a get-together of Rotarians this morning, and the Second Street, not Second Street, but the Southside Park, miniature golf park, is the site of an improvement project that's in the process of being formulated and will be implemented with various inputs. And one of the reasons I imagined that someone was thinking that these particular trees at the Southside Park might be a bother, perhaps they were their expanse of their crown might have enlarged since some of the I don't know what you'd call them, tees or holes in the park had been built. But better to remove those physical built facilities than to remove trees. I just wanted to make that input, and both can be had.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. It's really a sweet park. It's the first time I had a chance to walk around there. That's one of the little jewels of Athens. The next section of the agenda is landscape ordinance issues, and the first item is 176 Mill Street, where there is a really interesting project going on. There's a 4-unit apartment building with under the building parking, and then it's a very heavily constructed area already. There is more parking being put in. Steve, do you want to talk about this a little bit, the 176 Mill Street, or would you rather I did?
Well, I could just give a little background.
Okay, please.
The reason this is being considered by the Tree Commission would first have been under the landscape regulations, but in particular, this review is part of a Title 41 site plan review, the first Title 41 site plan review. And so the ordinance requires input from boards and commissions prior to the action of taking place by the Planning Commission for the overall project. So that's why, even though the Planning Commission ruled on it today, they also got your memo about the, what you would discuss this evening. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion here soon about other boards and commissions related to Title 41. So you'll be included in that. I've developed a draft checklist that lists all the boards and commissions that may need to give prior review or approval or recommendation.
I forwarded that to the members of the commission today.
So yeah, at the staff meeting, when I spoke to that Wednesday morning, the mayor's staff meeting, he recommended and asked that I send it around to all the boards and commissions, anybody who might be interested, because it's just in the draft stage right now. And this will be a guidance tool, a development guidance tool, very specific about things that need to be checked off, approved, not approved, commented on. So my anticipation is that this will be, a very important working document for a lot of the development projects in town. So just so, and I just wanted you to know that, that part, especially now with the regulations that we have, Tree Commission input's a really big part of a lot of these projects.
And Carolyn Thomas and Penderford Apartments are the lucky first case. So, did everybody on the commission get a chance to look at their plans? We had a meeting at one point to review this, and it is, let's see, we don't really have any video way of showing this to people watching, but I'll give it a shot. This is, if the gentleman on camera can shoot this, there is a building like so. That's doing pretty well. Yeah, and this is at 176 Mill Street. And there are 4 units in this apartment building, which means that there need to be 4 shade trees planted. The site does not really offer very much in the way of space, but there is a deep right-of-way out in front at 176 Mill Street. And Carolyn Thomason's, you're also the property owner of the property next door, 174, is that not right? And where there is yet another tree lawn, deep right-of-way that might accommodate shade trees. And so we're taking advantage of that, and that involves the tree permit part, which is that we concluded, and there's a memo that's been sent to Steve Pearson, and I hope shared with you, Carolyn. Very good. we're recommending that Pender Ford Apartments, Carolyn Thomason, be permitted to plant in the city right-of-way, basically 4 trees, shade trees, and we're following the landscape design that was submitted by Stan Vichner for Carolyn Thomason. Turns out that there's a high voltage cable at this site. It cuts across the corner. It comes from basically the Knights of Columbus side of the road of Mill Street and crosses over and heads toward, over here is the
SunPower?
Sterling.
yes,
Sterling.
Sterling technology. So we can't really put terribly tall shade trees in there, and the ones that Stan Vichner had suggested, the red maples probably are a good suggestion, and there could be 1 to 2 more shade trees in the 174 Mill Street tree lawn. If there is no space there, there was a suggestion that there be a shade tree at the back of the building and a site that's a walkway site. This could be a columnar or a fastigiate oak, and there'd be an oak out here in this tree lawn at 174, and 2 red maples here. And that was basically the recommendation to get that number of 4 shade trees. There is an existing large tree that's being removed, which we're very sad about. Part of it is in city right-of-way, but part of it's also on public, not public, but private property, the alley, basically, which is a private alley. And we would like to have a compensating replacement shade tree put someplace in another right-of-way conceivably. So that would make it 5 shade trees, and then the landscaping that Mr. Vichner had already proposed for Pender Ford Apartments. So I have, are there any questions about this?
What about the ginkgo or ginkgos? One of them will be in a parking area.
Oh, yes.
And that's not
I'm
part
sorry.
of the building, but.
No, the plan also shows some existing ginkgo trees and other, let's see, there's at least 3 existing trees there, and maybe a 4th one that's very small. They're all going to have to be moved for the construction project, and I think our assessment was that they might not survive transplanting. It would be nice to try.
Just to verify, the only one that potentially will need to be moved is the front ginkgo that's in front of 176.
Okay.
The others over near 174 they won't be touched.
Okay, so you'll protect them.
They will, yeah, we really won't even be close to them, so they will not be harmed at all.
Okay.
The ones,
Yeah, I
you're
can
looking
see.
at yes, the ones on,
Closest to 174.
write your fingers on it, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Just to verify, sorry about that.
No, that's good to know.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good that you keep that. They're wonderful.
Yes, it's a terrific tree, and when you try moving it will be key. If you do it when it's dormant, it will be much more likely to survive, right? So if it could be moved now and planted, someplace, and then someplace safe that won't be subject to compression from heavy equipment, that would really be a pretty good plan, wouldn't it? But you'd have to move pretty soon because with all this warm weather, dormancy may break.
There's
He's ready to move it tomorrow.
Go for it.
Stan will. And it will. Yeah, there'll be a speeding tree, I'm sure. There's also some. Let's see. There had been on the plans some hawthorns suggested. We ask that the hawthorns that you use be from varieties on our recommended street tree list because they're tougher. They're just. That's why we put them on that list, and that all trees are. That are planted are to be a minimum of 2 inches in diameter at breast height, and that is a concern. That gets the tree that's in the ground a good chance to survive a high traffic area, and that comes from a state certified nursery. And it might not be a bad idea to protect them with some sort of tubing. I think that would be worthwhile. So, do you have any questions, Carolyn? Stan, Mr. Vichner?
As of
Okay.
this moment, no.
Probably a little later, yes.
As the plannings go in, maybe potentially then, but
Fine so far.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
early.
Yes, okay. Does any other commissioner have a? Okay, very good. Thank you for putting the plan together, and the tree permit that allows the right-of-way plantings will be taken into the City Hall tomorrow morning.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you guys for having us.
Pleasure. We wish you well with that. Okay, the landmark, the next one we have is a landmark site, which is, ought to have been labeled more properly Palmer Place, right? Yeah, my apologies for labeling. And now we're going to challenge the microphones and this viewing area. Their plan is pretty good in terms of placement. We have some questions about locations of particular species, and there were, with this up here. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to come take a look at this. See, this is Palmer Place is off Stimson Avenue, and it has, it's where the old Bob's Supermarket well, presently still is. That will be a parking lot where Bob's Supermarket is. There's Kurtz Avenue that comes in behind it. The senior citizen residence at this point on the, this would be the south west corner. And then here is an apartment building around a courtyard. So there's, let's see, what is the name of the street that runs past the old St. Paul's School behind the...
Kern on the west,
Kern.
Kurtz on the east.
Thank you.
Right, Kern.
Yeah, so there's a series of trees here along Kern, trees in the parking lot, and these are shade trees by what is Downard's Ambassador Laundry. There was some question about why shrubs at this point when there's probably a possibility of shade trees here. This site has a complication of having 80% of the perimeter with high voltage power lines. It's just amazing. They come like this, they go like that, they go everywhere. So there's some sites where truly tall trees won't work. And the question is, at this point, could there be more tall trees here? The planting list is red maples. Let's see, is there some, no, there is nobody here from RVC. Emily, can you read that?
Which one?
Over here, this is,
TO.
5TO.
that would be,
It's a shrub.
you're right.
It's like a 3-foot shrub.
Yeah, okay, so there's high voltage power lines here, and at this point, topography changes, and they've got, this is PK, which is Prunus quanzan, so that's a flowering cherry, and there's more flowering cherries here. These are Acer rubrum, Freeman, so those are tall shade trees, relatively.
That's in the parking lot, AP.
Acer rubrum again. This
Okay.
is not the same coating, but it is. There are buildings very close here, buildings close here. This is like a little canyon where there are tall buildings that have popped out from the back of houses, turned into huge extensions of houses back here. So these are hawthorns. Pardon me. I think we had a couple questions about if we could have some lindens, some large shade trees in the courtyards. More shade trees along this alley edge on the St. Paul's, the senior center side.
No, I think there's dumpsters or something here. Is maybe why they're doing the shrub layer. instead of,
Oh, that might be, although there's a lot of parking spaces indicated.
yeah, it's right on the other side by Ambassador Laundry.
And this is all shrubs at this point, too. This is going to be hard to do in this meeting, in this format. And so I think we probably need to just have a meet again and look at this. The placement of things is good in the inside the parking lot for shade, but it's some question about why there aren't large shade trees in a couple of locations.
There might be some opportunity for input on the shrubs too, to get a little bit of size and a little bit less maintenance, shrubbery.
Yeah.
I mean, IT is just a litter catcher.
Well, David Ingram walked this area with David Callahan and did make some of the more specific recommendations about trees. Probably they're trying very hard to follow the suggestions that he made. But
it is a native. I
yeah.
maybe shouldn't be so hard.
A native would be nice. I would like to suggest that we wait about a week and give them perhaps with this a provisional approval, but with some serious changes in maybe 3 sites within the courtyard where there might be linden trees on these 2 edges where there might be shade trees here and shade trees here. So we've got 3 questions, basically.
Just so you know, John Valentour, the architect for the project, and also the architect for the next case you're going to consider on Fern Street, had submitted these plans to me late last week, and I had contacted you, Albie, about getting them on the agenda. That was at the request of Mr. Valentour.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. It didn't leave much time, but I tried to go through you and honor his request to have them reviewed tonight.
Yeah, it's a pretty good plan, really, don't you think? I mean, Emily and I looked at it a little more closely this afternoon, but all of us haven't had a chance to look at it, and there are those 3 basic questions.
But you're giving provisional approval? Or?
Shall we say provisional with these 3 points being satisfied?
Maybe approval, maybe a little strong, but that we like most of the plans, but we have some things we want to mull over before we go ahead. Something like that.
Well, then we backed off from provisional approval.
I mean, that's just my suggestion.
Yeah. If you have reservations about that, Emily?
Well, it seems to me that we could go ahead and give them provisional approval if they had gotten it in and were trying to get it through by tonight.
Do they really need to do this by tonight? No. Okay.
Now, the Bob's building has not yet been demolished.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of construction material being stored there, and it's still used as a parking lot also.
Well.
And the site itself is under construction, so.
Yeah. Well, then we have time.
Okay.
And so there is no, yes, okay, well then.
Do we have to have a quorum to give approval?
Yes.
Yeah?
Well, at
Okay.
the pace that I gather things are going, we could meet in sometime in the next month, and this could be on the agenda in March, and then they could get provisional
Okay,
approval.
all right.
But this, it did come rather quickly. Although they tried really hard with walking the site. David, okay. Comfortable with that? Anyway. This is a complex plan. I was just, if anybody wants to have a visual fix, it is an extraordinary thing.
It's a unique site because of all the power lines.
Yeah, and the power lines are really
Limits.
David, can I give you this to make noise?
So how many units are in that building, proposed building? Do you remember?
Somewhere between 70 and 80, I think, and with a population, tenant population of around 250, 270, something like that.
Well, it looks like it will really be very handsome in terms of the trees, the architectural choices that were being made. Very interesting.
Just so you know, too, I mentioned that I had these plans and they were going to be reviewed tonight. I mentioned that staff meeting Wednesday morning. And I had asked Nick Carr, the utilities director, to also come to to look at the plans to make sure the plantings didn't interfere in any way with any buried utilities in the area. I think if you recall with the McDonald's plans, Nick had some concern about the plantings, and so I've tried to get the Water and Sewer Department involved in this also.
Yeah, there's something quite significant in that site, as I understand, in terms of underground.
Yeah, there's a huge
drainage.
storm tunnel.
Yeah, probably historic.
In addition to all your maze of water and sewer lines.
Yeah, okay. Well, all right. Since there isn't anybody here from RBC, we can move on to the next one, which was Fern Street. Let's see, Daisy. Let's see here. That was the really colorful one, wasn't it? Or have I got?
No, Fern's
Is the
that's
up?
the
Here we
big
go.
wall.
Sorry. We have a much smaller desk to work with huge things. Okay. Steve, do you want to say something about the Fern Street plan?
This is a project that started before Title 41 was in effect. They did have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, however, just like 176 Mill had to for some setback variances. Ms. McWilliams attended that meeting because the site is so cramped and so tight. There's one building that's already been demolished, the old Strawn Plumbing building. There's a house down there that will also be demolished to accommodate some more parking. The building itself basically is built lot line to lot line, lot line to lot line to lot line to street. There's some parking then across the street, and the only remaining area to do any kind of planning at all is adjacent to the parking area, which is on the north side of Fern Street. And the plan's really very simple. I think it just indicates a series of flowering cherries, I think.
Yes.
As I recall.
12 parking spaces and then a 4-foot wide planting strip which runs the, oh golly, it doesn't quite have the measurement of that here, but is head-in parking coming in this way, and a strip running at the head of cars. And they put all 12, pardon me, 12 parking spaces, and they've got 7 flowering cherries. And this is a very odd site. They had there's steep hill to the back behind what was Strawn's Plumbing, which I understand they had some excitement with. And
The hillside's now been stabilized.
yes.
That's good news.
Yeah, that's the good news. Ann Bonner and I visited this site just yesterday, and this is Ann's description is absolutely right on. It's a tight site, challenging for young trees. The soil will be inhospitable for young trees, for trees. She recommends soil amendments be added to include compost and mulch, and perhaps tree-protecting landscape stones.
Boulders.
Boulders, yeah. Which is to say, this is a high traffic site.
Yeah.
The young man who was the contractor there said that as he was sitting in his truck, there were people walking around the truck and moving. The traffic patterns for pedestrians is just amazing there. So the trees are going to be in the path of all that. To increase the likelihood of the trees surviving and ultimately thriving to become an asset to the property, the urban forester recommends that shade tree varieties be used. Shade trees are long-lasting, less maintenance than ornamental trees. Upright, columnar, or otherwise known as fastigiate, white oak or sawtooth oak would work. These are really tough trees. The columnar ginkgos might also be a good long-term choice. Upright European hornbeam might be another choice, although this tree only gets 15 to 25 feet in height, and there are power lines at one point, so that might be a consideration. Anne recommends clustering the trees to fit the traffic pattern to promote the survivability of trees over time. And she encourages the architect, contractors to consider clustering the trees, staking, and adding soil amendments as necessary to give the trees a chance. And it's the clustering we looked at the, Emily and I looked at this, and you thought they could go closer together, the trees, than...
If they're the columnar type, I thought they probably could go closer together.
Yeah, and there's some places where it just doesn't make sense to have a tree. We might actually want to consider reducing the number of trees to guarantee that a tree isn't just going to be in the path of, in this one case, they put one in front of a front door.
Could they donate it to another site next door or something, or put it in on the slope?
If we had right of way,
We got them all in the space a little closer together. You might check this out and see if you think we
Well,
have gotten them too close.
One of my favorite slides of all time is of this parking lot in California where there are calorie pairs literally 3 feet apart in a triangle, and it was the best shade because the three of them actually they were surviving. They were protecting each other and they were working. So it's. In the woods they touch, so I don't
think you could get them in a triangle.
No, not
in a 4
It's a
foot
thin
wide
strip, yeah.
border.
yeah, and they need every
So when you're saying closer together, what are we talking about?
20 feet apart?
I think we were looking at maybe even 15 feet apart.
I think that would work.
If they're columnar trees,
Okay, and that would mean all 7 could be kept.
yes.
They might make more of a visual impression too that might change the traffic patterns. If there's a lot of them, maybe people see them as bars, they have to go around or something, or I don't know.
Okay.
We weren't going to hire tree security for this site?
It's going to be
It's coming.
The more they plant, the more chance some might live too. So maybe that's the other.
I
It's true.
would like to emphasize that the cherry trees seem to be a very poor choice for this site, and I think Anne has made some unusually good selections.
Yeah, yeah. I think the architect is a romantic, but they would not take this kind of hostile site.
But again, it's just another example of any time that we can scale back some of the hardscape on these sites that, because it's part of the over development of this limited site that makes it so difficult to actually add anything green to it at all. I mean, this will be a challenge of...
Yes. Although this is an abysmal site and has been for a very long time, it should be noted, except for the Klein Penny operation right here, which has a beautiful little house and a wonderful landscaping in front. And that the one spruce tree should be protected and given consideration of placement of these other trees.
Now, there's a fraternity yard in the southeast corner.
Over here.
And it starts sloping down. It's not very usable at that end. I don't know if there's a possibility that they could have a right-of-way from the fraternity to plant a tree there. But, within 20 feet of the site.
Yeah. We haven't done that with private property. We can do it with public, with right-of-way property.
Well, how far does the right-of-way extend in? Maybe it extends into their yard a bit.
Off of Fern Street to the fraternity?
I don't think there's any right-of-way in here. In fact, the
No,
original...
everything that's right away is pavement.
Okay.
And actually, a portion of this property that you cut across to get over to State Street, if you're coming down from Port Street, is actually on private property. They own the street.
They own
The developer owns the street.
Oh, okay.
I suppose in legal jargon, it's easement of necessity that the city has to maintain the street through there. But it wasn't a platted street for some reason. Fern was platted off Court Street and stopped, and then platted a short distance off State Street with an intervening section that was never part of a subdivision. But everybody just started cutting across, and it turned into Fern Alley, is what people call it. It's Fern Street.
So that's why they can build so much, because it's their land. It's not...
They're just building, it's a B3 zone where you can build basically right up to the property lines also.
And the Zoning Board of Appeals actually saw this as an improvement in the area. And one of the sanitary, the storm drain, the sanitary drain?
There's that large storm tunnel we talked about at Landmark is actually probably right under the parking area.
Yeah.
It runs right up against Athens Bookstore. You can probably hear stormwater running in the bookstore when it's raining. I mean, the tunnel's right there.
Yeah. So this is a very complicated site in terms of infrastructure. And, well, then, all the trees, all 7 trees should be planted and clustered closer together.
Mm-hmm.
Got that?
Got that in the notes, yeah.
Okay.
Suggesting 15 feet?
Suggesting 15
Mhm.
feet on centers of
And
columnar.
not the cherries, but the columnar
Yeah.
species that were recommended in Ann's letter.
The cherries would never survive.
Okay.
Sig Park.
You know, it could be a mixture too,
Oh,
not all the
yeah.
same thing.
Yeah,
That's
it
right.
could.
Maybe
Yep.
that should be in there too, a mixture, so
Mixture of
something
thick
should
bark
hit
oak
one
trees.
species.
Of columnar, right,
Yeah, so two kinds of columnar species. Let me give that to Emma. Let's see, what's the next? 98 West State Street, parking lot. Okay, I don't think anybody else except Ann and I got a chance to see this, and it is a pretty, golly,
It's a very colorful plan.
colorful plan.
Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah.
Show that to the TV.
Yeah, I think this is in living color. This is
They
quite
get an A for that.
Yeah, I wish I'd been at the party where this was done. This is the plan.
So the yellow
So-
is currently yard.
Do we have a code legend for the code?
There's no mention of
Ah.
grade change in this
Well,
conservation or
they've done a good job of representing structures and parking places. And
Yeah, so I could be wrong. Maybe Steve.
could have used a little bit more information on some other things, but there is, this is 98, excuse me, have you, oh, sorry. This is 90 West State Street, 90 and a half West State Street, and 98 West State Street, and they're improving the parking there.
It's a combined project by the owners of 2 properties there, University Rentals and Hunter Rentals. There's limited parking there right now. It's actually non-compliant, grandfathered parking. They'd like to install some additional parking. It's an R2 zone. So the parking has to be for the exclusive use of the residents. It can't be leased. You can't put a parking lot in that zone. So all this parking will go toward those uses that are existing now with deficient parking.
Okay, so this is making up for deficient parking.
Okay.
So
Um,
normally, we don't get people voluntarily asking to retrofit on their parking, but you do still have this same, we talked about this a lot, competing interests for a parking requirement being so high for residential, the use of existing buildings if possible, the reuse of buildings sometimes, but then you also have to have room for, other things that contribute to quality of life, like trees. So you have these competing interests going on. The automobile and the tree in Athens seem to be competing for space right now.
So there are, they're proposing to add 12 parking spaces. And
There are some that, the majority will be added to the Hunter Rentals property, and then I think there's just 3 that will be added to the University Rentals.
okay, yeah, that makes sense if people want to.
Yeah, now it'll be a private alley. If you'd go up there and look right now, there's a brick alley that goes down through there. It's private, but somewhere along the line, it was traveled by vehicles or horses or whatever. So that, they're using an existing passage, although be it a long time ago that people use it. It's just a driveway now, essentially, for the University Rentals property. But the 2 property owners are going to share the development cost to go down in and then just break off each way to try to provide some additional parking.
Was there
just-
any mention of the grade, drainage or the grade at all? It's really sloped, and there's 2 houses that are at the base. Sorry to interrupt, Elsie, but
Sure, that's all right. When the city reviews development plans for parking lots, there's more to it than just the trees. In that plan set, there's a drawing that shows the drainage that they're going to put in. I think also maybe with that, no, I kept it at the office. I have a soil report from Athens County Soil and Water Conservation District. It's very sandy soil. It's not slip prone, although it is very steep. All the stormwater will be picked up with trench drains, so instead of having to do a lot of complicated grading to get water to run to a catch basin, they're proposing, a series of several at-grade catch troughs. They own property additionally down the hill. They'll have to get with the Water and Sewer Department to take that water off the end of the property or the downhill side across properties that face Lancaster Street to get it to the storm sewer over in Lancaster.
And this is all surface drainage, or you're saying it's going to, when you say trough, this will be like a ditch?
It'll all be, no, it'll all be contained. Have you seen, well, if you got a steep driveway coming out of, say, an apartment project, and there's a grate that catches water and then puts it right into the storm sewer before it comes out on the street, that's what they're proposing. So it'll all go into a pipe.
Okay. So
It'll all be buried piping.
Yeah, and there is, one of these plans is just the drainage.
Oh, good. Good. I'm glad that was addressed. I didn't
Yeah.
see that.
I was concerned also about the
Yeah.
steepness. That's why I asked the developer to make sure to check with Kevin Lewis at Soil and Water Conservation. Kevin came by. He'd assessed this property about 4 or 5 years ago when there was a plan brought forth at that time. But it didn't happen, and now they want to bring the plan back. So yeah, drainage and slope are a big concern, but they seem to be able to be overcome with the
At least on paper.
Okay, well, let's see, the suggestions are that, let's see, there are trees here along the Hunter side. There are 5 trees indicated, and over on the, maybe I've got that reversed, but behind 98 are 3 parking spaces and 2 trees indicated. Behind, close to 90 are 9 parking spaces and 5 trees indicated. There are some existing trees in another yard directly behind 90, but those are not part of the calculation.
I think they were stumps, weren't they? On that
No,
side?
the stumps are over here where they've apparently already
Okay, where the
begun.
parking lot was
Yeah,
going to be. Okay.
maybe in the previous approach to that project. The proposal is for all these to be red maples, which would be probably the least likely to survive the site because they're thin bark, and this is an area that has a lot of traffic. It certainly looked to have had a lot of traffic, and there wasn't even a parking lot there when we went.
When the developer came and presented the plan to me, excuse me, he said I had to actually get him to indicate which trees were the new trees as opposed to the ones that existed. And he said, well, what trees would the tree commission like me to plant? I said, well, I'm not really sure. But then I did give him the list of recommended trees, and he just selected one.
Well,
I don't
it's-
know either if there's trees that might do a little better in sandy soil. It's very sandy soil, actually,
Yeah.
which is not very common at all.
Yeah, this is really a geological fluke of some sort, very
is.
interesting. But Ann's suggestion for the site in terms of toughness and also...
Thick bark.
Thick bark and the...
The theme of the night.
That's our theme, right?
And the soil were shade trees such as sawtooth oak, shingle oak, and other white oak species. We might want to mix those up. Lee would like to see that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And and they're not maples, which are great, but we've got a lot of maples in Athens.
Yeah, that's the predominant species here, really. So some assortment of sawtooth, shingle oak, or white oak species. And the other recommendation that Ann made was that they protect these trees in some fashion because it is such a high traffic area.
I mean, it's party central there, and there's barely grass in some of the areas, you know.
Yeah, there were more red and yellow cups than there were grass.
Yeah.
So,
So, you know, big mulch rings, and maybe this would be a site where maybe the tree should be staked. You know, and it's just, again, to protect developer's investment in them. But yeah, I'd say it's going to be it's going to be like those other projects we worked on down on Mill and Stewart Street, that when they're on private land, it's really hard for those trees to survive, you know.
Yeah, well, some sites do better than others. I have to say, at the bottom of Mill Street, it looked good. When we looked at 176 and 174, those, they didn't have that kind of problem.
Yeah, you're right.
But this is,
You know, I think Mr. Hunter would be glad for any recommendations. He's who I talked to about this. This is quite an voluntary investment on their part.
Yes,
They don't
it is.
have to do this, unlike other projects where it's a requirement. This is something that somebody's stepping up and doing voluntarily. So it's quite an investment in the parking, and there'll be an investment in the trees, and I think they'd want to protect both.
Indeed. Yeah, it is a real service to the people in those houses that they finally have someplace to park. Yes, and there is open space here that permits large shade trees, so it's good. Any other? Thank you, Anne, for all the work you did in the rain. On these. Anything else on this? That was the most cheerful colored set of plans that we had. Let's see.
Here's the big out.
Okay, I'm losing the agenda here below. Thank you very much.
100.
Okay, I think that does it for landscape ordinance issues, unless, Steve, you have something else for us that we would address probably at a March meeting. No other landscape ordinance issue or comment?
No others right now. I see you have front yard gardens on the agenda, so I'll pick up again then.
Okay. And for people who are leaving the meeting and who might not have gotten an agenda, I have a New Yorker cartoon on the back for your entertainment. It shows that there's even parking constraints in hell, apparently. Okay. The next item of business is a landscape ordinance revision, and that is moving through council. Ilaku, it's had a second reading at this point. Is that true?
Yeah, it was on second reading last meeting,
Okay.
I believe.
And David Ingram was the workhorse on that one. On the emerald ash borer, we still do not have the data. No. Okay, and there, alas, there's nothing to report on ODOT Gateway Grant application at this point. But maybe a little later.
Let's not give up.
No, let's not give up.
Free money for trees.
Let's see, and then Anita Frederick, who's working on the website information for us with Ron Forrest, who would be putting this up, says that content for the first 3 pages of the website are ready to give to Ron Forrest as soon as they're approved by the mayor's office. And Anita is going to review the material too, just to make sure that nothing has changed in time since it's been submitted, time-sensitive things. And Ron Forrest will be the person to whom all updates are given, and then he will enter them. They must be provided to him in a Microsoft Word format, and he'll make sure the update is made to the website in a timely manner. So that's coming along. Let's see. And front yard gardens. This is a hot topic.
And by this we mean vegetables, vegetable garden, as opposed to flowering plants?
I think we were talking about both. And or wildflower gardens.
Well, when Steve was talking to it before, it seemed like the issues mainly had to deal with vegetables rather than our traditional herbaceous and perennial flowers plants, but maybe I was wrong.
That's why a little bit of information I gave you was a news article related to my appearance before City Council last year. Code officers on complaint went out into one particular neighborhood to have quite a few things cleaned up, including vegetable matter, flowers, tomato vines, things like that. And a petition was presented to council to wanting to know why the code office had told someone to cut down their tomato plants in the front yard, and we had not done that. I'm not sure how that rumor got started. But ended up, we were just addressing trash, old couches, old chairs, wildly growing grapevines, I mean, just all kinds of things. But it ended up being discussion about gardens related to that. I started doing a little investigation because in the Athens City Code, vegetation is called litter by definition. And so we were out addressing litter, but it happened to be vegetation. As I started doing a little research, it seems that the city of Sacramento, California, just recently went through this exact same situation. Code officers had gone out to investigate some complaints in the neighborhood because people were planting vegetables and different kinds of things in the area between the front of a house and the curb. And they were accused of the same thing, essentially going out and telling people you can't have a garden in your front yard. So then the question became, for Sacramento, their 1941 ordinance that they had, which did allow some things, but not to cover more than a certain area, not to be over a certain height, were reviewed. And some of the argument that went along with it was the amount of energy that it takes in terms of producing water to water grass. They were concerned about that. Sustainability in terms of people producing their own vegetables, flowers, those kinds of things. Actually, the Athens City Code does allow you to, at your house, you can grow flowers, for example, and sell them at the farmer's market. That's permitted. So Athens has had a lot of gardens in the front yard, depending on what you call a garden. If you look at the second page, what I did was I just gave you a copy of the Sacramento ordinance. For example, in Section B, landscape maintenance requirements, it says that the landscaping may include grass, annuals, perennials, ground cover, shrubs, and trees, but no junk, debris, or other material. Section C, it says that nothing shall exceed 4 feet in height except trees, and those trees free of branches 5 feet above grade. So what happened in Sacramento was they didn't limit, as they had before, the amount of your front yard you could have in landscaping. They did, though, retain the 4-foot maximum height. A lot of the discussion was about line of sight, visibility, that kind of thing, and then, the amount of debris that you might have at the end of a growing season. So they did still include the maximum 4 feet in height. And again, right now in the Athens City Code, there's nothing that prohibits it, but it's just that this whole thing came up when we were addressing people growing vegetables in their front yard, oftentimes also on the right-of-way. And if you go around town, you can see people that they're growing all kinds of things in their front yards. It makes Athens kind of neat, especially on the hillsides. When your house is up, you've got this area that you really don't want to have to mow. What do you do with it? East State Street, I think, is a great example on the high side of what people have done in that front setback area to have a landscape area. Nobody's ever said anything about it up until now. The code office just found themselves in a dilemma, as they did in Sacramento, about how to handle the debris at the end of the growing season. So there isn't anything in this regulation except that it says, let me see if I can find it. I'm sorry, I underlined a bunch of things, can't go right to it. What really wasn't too clear in here to me, and I think if Athens does adopt some kind of regulations for the front yard, there needs to be a good description of when you have to clean up the area. I don't know about you guys, in my backyard, I cleaned it up a little bit and then the weather changed, and I'd be embarrassed to have that in my front yard, but I don't mind it so much in the backyard. Except here in town, people are going to do this in the front yard also. Most people are very good about cleaning up these things. Please don't get me wrong on that. But at the code office, once we get a complaint, we have to address it. And once we get in a neighborhood and see the next one, and then that person comes out and talks to you, and they complain about the person around the corner, all of a sudden, this thing that didn't seem like a big problem turns into a big snowball. So anyway, a little history. If you go on the web and do some background searching on Sacramento, it's a great discussion that people had about it. It has to do with quality of life, sustainability. As a matter of fact, one of the articles I read said, "Give peas a chance," was the title of it. So it had a lot to do with, a culture of self-provision, doing things that, vast expanses of grass in front yards is not, that's something from the 1960s, right? And it's not common around here.
Steve,
Anyway, just an example right there. And then actually, what I've got, the last page is just their ordinance revision. When they revised their 1941 ordinance, this is just a section that they revised. So all the things that were revised from their old regulations was just this page. And then it ended up being the entire ordinance, which is the other section.
I think one of the interesting things is that it's really hard. Everybody has a different idea of what's beautiful or what's acceptable, and part of human nature is unfortunately complaining about your neighbors. And I think this would be such a can of worms, especially in a town where gardening is. I cannot think of a town where there are more gardeners and more knowledgeable people about gardening, and I think it's part of what makes Athens so beautiful and unique and fun to walk. I love walking here, especially in the summer, so I don't know. I hate to see it kind of forced into some sort of rigid box, where I remember when I worked for the city of Dublin, there were sight line, and there was the 4-foot rule, and people still, they did all kinds of crazy stuff, either to try to get around it or, so as long as you're not impacting public safety by creating blind spots going out of driveways, which I think most people are pretty considerate about that, I'd hate to see any more laws about what you can't plant in this town.
Or being responsible, because, some people just, it sounds like a great idea, and then they don't take care of it. And, gardeners down at the community gardens complain about each other's gardens when they don't come and weed that often, or, Steve, did you, if you look down at, I see they have it on the revised one too, which is really hard to believe, but it's talking about what can be used as ground cover, and
Yes.
it's saying under B, and it's saying that they can't use, you can't use, rocks and mulch. They can't. It may. So they did change that, right? Okay, because in Carmichael, which is right next to Sacramento, people use a lot of that volcanic rock in their landscaping, and that's an area where there's no rain for many months. So on the original one, it was requiring a lot of watering, but it looks like in the revised one. Not that we have to worry about Sacramento,
Right.
but I just thought that was rather ironic.
There's nothing in the Sacramento ordinance that prohibits a garden, that I see.
No, it actually permits it and regulates it. Like I said, right now in Athens, there are no regulations at all.
Just says it has to be maintained,
Right.
trimmed.
Yeah, I did find the section right there under B. It says no junk, debris, or other similar material will be stored in the landscape setback area. So I'd say that'd give you leverage enough to say, clean your garden up after the frost.
Steve, I can see one problem with that, which is people who want a wildlife garden, wanting to attract birds. Some of the seed heads of flowering plants, which might be stuff that should be cleaned up to some of the neighbors, are what they're wanting as natural bird food.
Like black-eyed Susans, the seeds had.
Yeah.
Coneflower.
Asters.
Yeah, see, the problem is the ordinances that I have right now to work with say that vegetation is debris, has to be cleaned up.
How about,
I just saw this
I
article.
didn't initiate any of this, believe me, and I'd
Yeah.
rather we
It
not be
wasn't from a
here
complaint.
right now
These are
talking
percentages
about this.
complaint
But
driven.
I owe it to my officers because they're the ones that go out in the neighborhoods and take the heat. Where we're trying to get people to clean up their properties. And they're looking at all aspects of what is, cleaned up enough. We got into a huge controversy. I mean, it even became before City Council as a petition to essentially stop the code office from, yanking out everybody's tomatoes, which we weren't doing.
but I think you're
But in the
safe,
same-
if
you
you,
still
if you
have-
focused on the safety issue, I mean, I guess that would be within the code, at least the code that I read, that, just the sight lines so that people can turn corners and get out of driveways. I mean, it's kind of like trees, we just try to focus on the public safety issue because inevitably, there's some ugly tree that somebody hates and some one that somebody else loves. So if you just kind of focus on the public safety aspect of it, you can kind of let all that other stuff, just say, we don't regulate that stuff and move on to the next
Right,
thing.
and
Yeah, I guess the trouble is, though, that we do regulate it.
By the
City
way,
does regulate
I
it.
just read this article on 100 years ago in a small Vermont town. The newspaper reported the approach to determining if a fence was of legal construction. You were
Oh, that's right, we
mentioning.
had a fence.
And it says one police officer on the force weighed 300 pounds, another one was 6'8", and the third was extremely small. It was recently voted that all fences with which a fat man could sit on, which the tall man could step over, and the little one crawl through, should be termed legal. That was 100 years ago.
Things were so much simpler then.
Yes.
Until the personnel changed.
Yes. Well, Steve, do you need something from us?
No, just that I'd asked, I told City Council that before I got information back to them, I'd solicit input from the Tree Commission. And if your input would be that gardens in the front yard not be regulated, that's fine, but it still leaves the code office in a quandary about getting things cleaned up like.
Right.
Well, how would you
But Ann,
inter-
like you said, an example would be, we have people that grow big sunflowers right up by the street in their front yard, and they like to leave them there, all winter. Lots of other kinds of plants to attract birds during the wintertime.
I'm all for it.
Yeah, I know, but
Sorry.
my officers need to know how to address complaints.
Can't we just
to other
focus on the
people.
red plastic cups that are flying around everywhere? Sorry.
Yeah, we do that too.
Sorry.
Well, what about if there's a lot of dead, like when the plants become dormant or the annuals die back, then that becomes flammable material. I mean, even more so. So that kind of is a safety hazard, isn't it? If people have it particularly like right up their house, have a lot of stuff in their yard that should have been cleaned up. I
I
could see
suppose,
that there could be a
I suppose that
fire.
would be, one aspect of it. That's why, for example, things that contribute to blight and are called debris are things like abandoned furniture also. Things that can create a fire load. So yeah, that might be part of it too. But there's just, for example, we've got the ordinance that talks about grass and noxious weeds, and we don't know what noxious weeds are. There's no definition. Department of Agriculture has an agricultural list.
Yeah.
We get a complaint and we go out and something looks like a weed to a code officer, and you need to clean this up, and then you do get then sometimes a lecture on you don't know what weeds are and this is not. It's like, yeah, but I got this complaint and I need to deal with.
If there
You know,
are,
right now there's nothing to stop people from growing corn in their front yard, and it seems to be a trend.
yes, I could, had a neighbor once who grew corn as a kind of a backstop for his children's soccer games. It was in a front yard, and it worked, And the birds rather liked it too.
So I guess in other words, we're not really helping you much here, Steve.
No, we're
are we?
not.
No, that's fine. I understand where you're coming from.
But there might be something just in terms of seasonal cleaning that is done by gardeners to their gardens. One cleans a garden somewhat at the end of a season, or hires somebody really good to come and do it.
But I think a lot of it's weather dependent. I noticed there's one garden that's on the Near East Side. I can't remember which, but tons of asters in it, beautiful. But they look really ragged by the end of it, by this time of year. And just with the great weather that we had just over the weekend, I noticed they were all cleaned. But for somebody to have pressed her, she was out of town.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, I don't know. I don't think it was a public safety hazard.
Yeah.
I kind of liked to watch it, but they did get cleaned up. We just all have different
It was
schedules.
the opportunity, and it does seem like this isn't something that really needs regulation. This is.
So I guess our consensus also is looking at it as a safety hazard.
If it's blocking visibility.
View of pedestrian or auto safety or fire.
Fire hazard.
Yeah.
Junk catching water that will breed mosquitoes.
It's the last time he'll bring anything up to us.
Yeah.
Sorry, Steve.
We mostly back them up.
Yeah.
We're drawing the line at the sunflowers.
That's right.
Okay.
One of the places we went to investigate, the way the officer was able to even get to it was to run the groundhog path because everything else was so overgrown, which was coming out from underneath the house.
Yes,
Just another day in the life of a code officer.
That's true. Yes, well, there was an eccentric individual down on the Near East Side who had a front yard full of interesting stuff for over a decade, as I recall. It just really was there, but behind a fence, I think, in part.
Illegal fence, probably.
Yeah, grown up, no doubt. Yeah, this is. It does seem like an unnecessarily intrusive regulation. Let's see if that's all that we can offer code enforcement on this subject.
I think we've done enough damage.
Yeah, we've done enough damage. The next item is the recommended street tree list revision, and Emily has volunteered to take that on.
And Lee has also volunteered. And I assume that Ann will help us.
Sure.
She volunteered. I have a question about that. I'm wondering if there's a possible way when we revise it, we could add some kind of key that indicates whether the tree is good for dry site, wet site, compacted soil.
Good idea.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Do you have some good lists of how
I would
trees are organized that way?
Probably beyond shady and sunny sites, it would have to be individually looked up.
Back of Durr's Hardy Trees and Shrubs has that.
There's some things back there. And the new book on emerald ash borer replacements for woods and landscapes and all sorts of places has good information on trees for wet sites. So we could use that.
Okay.
I'll email you some things that.
Okay,
that I've-
and I think also trees that, where the roots can be a problem.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Actually,
We need to.
If it branches out, you could really put together quite an information packet and even have websites one could go to.
I think you're volunteering.
To our website.
Ideally, this will be on the website, and a wonderful thing would be to have a hot link. You'd click on the species, and you'd get an image of the tree.
But what I meant was that
That'd
a
be
lot of
great.
times a particular site we're asked for recommendations, and there might be some generic recommendations that are specifically useful in this particular area. Certain heights, certain types.
We do have them organized according to height.
I think one of the challenges, though, is that everybody's always looking for the perfect tree. And it seems like whatever the site is, there's always some
Limiting
problem.
issue.
And so it's always hard to kind of have general guidelines, because, somebody could always pick them apart and say, why'd you pick this? So it's always a challenge.
Well, thank you, Emily, and Lee, and Ann. That'll be good. Let's see, we have on the other front. Other is the Title 41 is coming toward us, and so I would ask everybody on the commission to please look at your email and you will find Athens City Code Title 41 Site Plan Review Checklist in there. And this is in draft form at this point.
Right, I just drafted that a couple weekends ago, and it's circulating amongst all the departments now, because that will be a guidance tool for the Planning Commission when they're reviewing these types of projects. So this is a chance for everybody. The fire chief, for example, already commented. He added some things toward the end of it in on fire protection observations. So this is your golden opportunity to weigh in. There's really not much in there for the tree commission, except that it may be another board and commission approval, but feel free to, modify it, tweak it, put a little extra emphasis on something. So this is the chance, because this will be a document probably that all future planning commissions will use. Everybody in the administration will look at. Department heads have to. The ordinance says the service safety director can ask for input from other city departments. So, for example, the competing utility tree lawn area. If you want to, make some kind of comment about, the utilities and the trees and how that, looks in the hierarchy, because the city has to service these properties. That's part of it with road, water, sewer, street lights, electricity. So this is like the exhaustive list of competing interests that you're looking at there. So this is the opportunity for a little bit of input. And even if it's just a comment, too, to the Planning Commission, something that they may be able to incorporate into policies and procedures that they don't have now. I know Mayor Weil, when he came into office, was looking for a copy of the Planning Commission policies and procedures, and everybody seemed to think there was such a document, but nobody could find one. My department has policies and procedures, and so do all city departments. So it's something as an administrator, too, you can look at, you can pull out a book. It's like an administrative code. I have this regulation, how do I apply it? And it gives you a history, essentially, of what the city's done, and and then it gives you an opportunity, too, then as an administrator to go back and revise that if it's not working. So this is a document that will probably be out there for a while, I hope. Nobody will ever know that I drafted it, but that's okay, too.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any other issues that we missed? Okay. Well, then we have the minutes of the January meeting to review and make sure that we were all in attendance. If there, let's see. Let me. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Pardon me. With the glasses, I never know.
Greg Broadhurst, 14 Granville. I just wanted to address the project, or I should say, of putting together a suggested tree list, and actually having attended the International Society of Arborists Ohio chapter conference previous years, and I also am a candidate for certification here shortly. I was able to come across some publications, and I happen to have a pretty good one right here that you can take a look at. I'll copy these and get them to one of you so you can take a look at it, and the people that were going to put together this list. And it has to do with site limitations as far as size, crown breadth, and soil types and everything.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
That's great.
So some of your work's already done, and you can use that maybe to branch out. This was something that was put together by Bill Hendricks, a nurseryman. I think is he from the river?
Lake County, I think, isn't it?
Is he from the river?
Lake County.
Oh, he's from Lake County. Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be legendary.
He's legendary, huh? Well, yeah, we've got something to start with. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
That's cool. He's awesome.
Okay. Wow. People had a chance to look at their minutes? Any additions, amendments? motion to approve the minutes?
Sure. I'll approve this motion.
Yes, okay, David moves and probably approves, and anybody seconds, and Emily, would you second?
I
Not
second
meaning
it.
to fish, we're falling asleep up here.
No, I was looking at something.
Yeah, I thought-
And our audience is waiting for the grand finale.
That's true, that we will actually either fall asleep or adjourn.
That's all.
So, all right, I guess the minutes are accepted. And is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Yes, done with the yawn, thank you, Lee. Second.
Sure.